Hey, friend, welcome back to the podcast this week. Okay, I cannot even contain my excitement. I have a stomach ache. I didn't sleep well because my podcast guest today is someone that I just admire so much. And I've shared him with you on my Instagram. I've shared his podcast on my stories with you, his book that he has out that we're going to talk about. And I just can't wait to actually get to meet him in real life, even though it's, through the internet. And for you guys to get to meet him too. And so today I'm interviewing Dr. Dharius Daniels. He is the founder and lead pastor of Change Church. They have locations in New Jersey and in Orlando, and they at this point have a global platform. So it's his book, Relational Intelligence, that I've been talking to you guys about on Instagram stories. It's the people skills you need for the life of purpose that you want. If you have any relationship problems at all with family, with friends, with mentors, in your work environment, you're going to love this book. You're going to love this conversation. Dr. Daniels, he's such an innovative leader. He's a strategic thinker. He's very articulate and a prolific preacher. He has a way of delivering a message, both when he's preaching on stage and when he's writing a book, that I just appreciate and love so much. It's so relevant. It speaks right to my heart and soul. You guys are going to love Dr. Dharius Daniels. I'm so excited to have him here today. Pastor Dharius, welcome to the podcast.
I'm excited to be here.
I'm
looking
so
forward
excited.
to it.
Okay, so I got to get the cheesiness off my chest right off the bat. I went on Instagram this morning and I basically told my people, okay, what do I call him? Because on your book, it's Dr. Dharius Daniels. And your mom was obviously so smart in giving you all the D's, because it just kind of rolls off your tongue really well. So is it Pastor Dharius? Is it Dr. Daniels? Is it Dr. Dharius? What are we supposed to call you?
So everybody calls me different things. So I tell them whatever you're comfortable with. So some people call me Dr. Dharius. Some people call me Pastor Dharius.
Okay.
Yep. So most of the time I'm referred to as pastor by people that are a part of our local church, or people kind of met me in that way. But most people outside of it, they call me doctor.
Okay.
To me, it really doesn't matter.
Okay, that's so funny.
Yeah.
My husband has this saying, I don't care what you call me, just don't call me late for dinner. So, which is funny considering I don't even cook, but I'm so excited to have you here. So will you kind of tell my audience what it is that you do? I read your bio, of course, which is super impressive, but where you are, a little bit about your family, all of those fun facts.
Yeah, well, it's a brief history on me. I'm born and raised in Mississippi. Pastor's son, was originally headed to law school, went to college in Jackson, Mississippi, a small liberal arts school called Millsaps College, and was heading to law school. That was my intention. My major was political science. I had really an interest more in just political theory, which I think God was kind of using that, because I got introduced to theologians and things of that particular nature. And so long story short is, about my sophomore year of college, I started getting this sense of call that I was supposed to use my life to serve the church. And I wrestled with that all the way up to the second semester of my senior year, releasing that law school dream. And and long story short is I finally did. And there was this one particular grad school that I wanted to go to. And one of my professors at undergrad made me apply to 3 schools. She's like, I will not write your recommendation unless you apply to 3. And I just knew I was going to the school that I wanted to go to. And I actually didn't get in that school. I had incredible grades. It was really, it was just such an anomaly. I'd never been rejected from anything academically. Right. My grades were great. They just didn't let me in. Really didn't give me a reason. And that's when I learned that rejection is direction. And as a result of that, I ended up not going to that school. I was going to go to Vanderbilt, which was in Nashville. It was closer to home. Because I applied so late, they were only able to give me a 75% scholarship. I couldn't afford the other 25%. Mm-hmm. Then 7 days later, Princeton came through and I was able to go to Princeton for free. And so long story short, that's kind of my path. I met my wife in college. We were college sweethearts and got married. And she's born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. And so we spent some time in New Jersey. I flirted with the idea of I always felt this call not to be this or that, but to be this and that. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know if that was going to mean serving a church and being a professor, serving a church and and serving people in other ways. But long story short is, I kind of say when people ask me what I do now that don't know who I am, I just say I help people. And so whether that's through the context of the church, teaching them, or whether that is in some way coaching, mentoring, individually or in groups, serving people in that way. That's kind of my life's mission.
Yeah, and you've also done some leadership conferences and things, haven't you? Because I'm pretty sure that I read about that or heard about that somewhere, and I immediately like emailed your team, and I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa! If he has anything leadershipy this year, like I'm there. And I know, 2020 is a crazy year for in real life things, but
yeah. So for me, this is what. So yes, to answer that question, yes, I did my graduate work at Princeton, but I went to Fuller, which was out in California, to do my doctoral work because that's where John Maxwell got his doctorate from. And so it's just an incredible school for leaders and for leadership. And I just felt like, as John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on that. And so I went there and obviously and always want to be a self-starter, self-learner, to learn and to grow in that area. And I started, COVID messed it up this year, but a few years ago, I started hosting this event just for people who lead in any field.
Yes.
Because this is what I believe. I believe whatever entity you lead, it is just a delivery system to serve humanity. So if you're leading a church, all the church is a delivery system. It's transportation. If you're leading a business, that's what it is. It's a delivery system. And so because my sense of call and passion is this and that, we held this event. We called it Thrive. And it was basically, our emphasis was twofold. And the first area was an area that I see a lot of people who lead well struggle in this area, and that's the area of self-leadership. So it's self-leadership, but then also organizational leadership, all blended into one day, one event. And so we called it Thrive because that's what we believe. I don't believe you have to destroy your empire to build destroy your castle to build an empire.
Right.
I believe, I believe you could be successful and sane at the same time. And so that's kind of my passion too, right? I don't want people to build big things and have a small life, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yep. So yeah, that's kind of my deal there.
Well, I love that you brought up your wife because as much as I, love your ministry, I'm almost loving your wife as much as you at this point. So just know that.
I don't blame you.
And we both, your family and ours, both have our oldest firstborn son that has just recently left home. So I've been following that on Instagram. How are you guys doing with adjusting to your oldest being gone?
Well, so I think we're doing okay now. We're doing pretty good. Yeah. I would say the initial, because he went to West Point, we only had contact with him maybe once or twice over a 4-week period.
Yes.
Because they go into basic training and they take their phones. Yeah. So I think that is what made the initial first few weeks very difficult for us, because there was little to no contact. We could write letters, but that was it. And so once that was over, and he could actually get his phone, and we could FaceTime him and
Mom
hear from him.
Know he was okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that was like night and day for us, just being able to talk to him. So I think we're adjusting pretty well.
Awesome. Okay, so tell me, how old is your church? When did you start the church? You have a couple of different locations, and I think it's kind of fascinating how you navigate that. And I don't know if how you navigate it in 2020 is different than how you navigated it in 2019, but I'd love to know just a little bit more about your church, and then I'm going to just hammer you about your book. I've got 2 pages of notes.
Well, so once, so this is an incredible story, right? So I'm in this class at Princeton Seminary, and there's this guy there who just so happens, he's like getting ready to, this is how providence and timing works. He's getting ready to leave, right? But he's getting ready to leave right as I'm coming in. And so because I couldn't get into some other classes, I end up being in this guy's class. So I'm sitting there, and he is giving language to some things that I have been feeling in my heart in terms of, this is what I believe. I think this is so incredibly important. He was giving language in terms of a way to customize your calling. Like sometimes when you're in a line of work and you see someone that's been incredibly fruitful and successful, there's a tendency, instead of just adopting best practices, there's a tendency to emulate that example. Absolutely. But that may not be the way that you're wired.
Right.
and it may not be the highest and best use of you. So he was just giving us permission to rethink what it would look like to actually do church, to think about church the way a missionary would think about serving people in a foreign country, and to look at what's going on culturally, what's going on regionally, what are some of the prevailing issues in this area. Now, how do you build an entity in an organization that specifically is relevant for the times that you're in and serves that demographic well, as opposed to just simply taking the model that's been handed down to
Right.
us in the West for generations. So before he left, I just took everything that he offered. I don't care what he taught. I was sitting in there.
Yep.
And what happened was, sitting in that class, I said to myself, now that is something worth giving up law school for. That is why I'm here. I want to build something like that. And so with that being the case, I came out of seminary in 2004. In 2005, my wife and I planted our dream. I mean, and it's been a journey. So we're 14 years in. And so we have this weird dynamic where we're multi-site, meaning we've got multiple expressions of the same church in different areas. But as opposed to simply doing that regionally, as opposed to doing it simply within the same city, we decided to do it regionally.
Right.
And part of that was we just saw that we had pockets of people who were, through the internet or YouTube and things of that particular nature, following our ministry, supporting it, drawn by it. And so we saw there was kind of a need and a hunger. And so it's that determined what we did in terms of where we placed churches, and also a sense of call in terms of what do we feel like we're supposed to be, what areas will be best served by the way that we do what we do. And so we've got 2 locations in New Jersey. We've got a location in Orlando and one in Los Angeles.
That is great. And you travel, right, on occasion between them?
Yeah, not so much.
Not so much
now,
today.
of course, yeah. But
yes.
Yep. So Los Angeles was a little different. And again, that goes to a region, right?
Right.
Because the mindset out there was much more fluid, less religion is not as prevalent in culture. So they were open to an expression and a style of church that wouldn't have worked in Jackson, Mississippi.
Right.
So I rarely went out there. I would go out there live maybe once a quarter or so. But because Orlando was new, and we started it about 1.5 years ago, because it was new, we knew it required a little bit more of our presence. And so we were doing some commuting between Orlando and New Jersey and leading and serving the churches there.
Love it. Okay. So the way that I even found you, this is a shout out to my friends, Jonathan and Christy O'Reilly. They are on staff at my home church, the Rock of Kansas City. And so they actually heard you speak at a conference about 3 years ago. And they knew that I'm a huge Stephen Furtick fan. And I love Pastor Stephen Furtick. I listen to his podcast like all the time. Also, I coach well over 2,000 business owners every month, like in small groups. That's how I actually make a living and what I do. And his book, Crash the Chatterbox, is actually like a recommended reading for every woman that comes into my coaching group. And I got to tell you, your book, Relational Intelligence, is now a recommended reading for all the people that come into my group as well. But it started with your podcast, and I got to ask you a podcast question just because you're on my podcast. So you had the Change Church podcast. Are you on a break right now? Number one, are you on a break, or am I having a hard time finding it?
No, this is what happened. Yes. Okay. So we're on a break.
Okay. Because I'm like, I look for you and Stephen every week, and I'm like, where is he at?
Yeah. Okay. We're on a break. And so we ran into some issues with Apple there, with my name being used twice or whatever. So that we're trying to actually rebrand that, because although the graphic said Change Church, when whoever initially set up the podcast on our team, they set it up under my name.
Under your name. Okay.
So when I started my podcast on Faith, Life, and Culture, I started it under my name. And so there's kind of like this conflict. So now they're going through the process where they're actually getting the podcast under Change Church's name, and then they'll start uploading the messages there.
Awesome.
Again.
Now, when the podcast comes back, and I want you guys, your podcast listeners, so go subscribe to that. Will you have the video still? Because I think it's brilliant that you do, even through the podcast app, I can like literally watch you on stage preaching.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I love that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Then I feel better. All right. Let's talk about your book. So I got your book in the middle of the pandemic, and started forcing myself to like sit down and read books. You know, there's so many good things that have come out of this
Hmm.
really yucky time. Your book was one of them for me. So, friends, his book is called Relational Intelligence, and I want to read the subtitle because I think like the main title is what everybody thinks is sexy, but the subtitle is like where you get like the meat and potatoes, like what the
Hmm.
book's actually about. So your subtitle is
Yeah.
the people skills you need for the life of purpose you want. And you know, the thing is like I feel like I do pretty good with relationships, but then when I look at like back, you know, I'm 49 years old at this point. When I look back in my life, like all of my major life issues or heartaches have also involved relationships.
Yes.
Isn't that the crazy thing? And I'm like,
Yes.
so I picked up your book because you said to, and you know, at this point, I, you know, am reading what you tell people to. And so, number one, is this your first book? Because if you have a second one, I haven't read it.
No, so it's my second book. I think my first book I published in 2013 or 14.
Okay.
And yeah, this is my second one. And it is, I'm not gonna say it's my most important one. It is definitely, I think, the most consequential one.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I feel like relational intelligence is a meta skill, right? If you get that right, then it alleviates and sometimes eliminates some other problems
It sure
in
does. Yeah.
in areas of our life. But yeah, so it's my second book.
Well, and I know the majority of my audience are they're female, and a
Hmm.
large portion of them are business owners, and so a lot of you know just people problems are people problems. But a lot of
Yes.
our problems as people are people problems, and I want to read just the inside cover because I knew that your book was going to be good when I was literally like highlighting. This will be on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, when you highlight the inside cover, you know it's going to be good. So let me read this real quick. So this book is about how to assess your relationships, define them, discern them, align them, and finally activate them to unlock your greatest potential. All relationships are catalytic, either
Yes.
pushing us forward into our God given purposes or holding us back in every aspect of our lives, from financial to spiritual. Progress is greatly influenced by who we allow to be a part of our lives and what roles we allow them to play. So, right now, God's got me in a season of breaking free from people pleasing, which I think a lot. Do you find that a lot of females in particular have a lot of people pleasing tendencies? And because of people pleasing, like as I'm reading the book, I'm like, okay, this makes so much sense. But because I've been so much wired to just want everybody to like me, it's
Hmm.
hard for me to put people in the right kind of category that you
Yes.
talk about in the book. And so let's start there. Maybe tell me about like the four different kind of categories that you're supposed to be kind of putting people into. And can you also, just so that people know that we're still really nice people, kind of explain to us like how this is biblical?
Yeah. Yeah. So here's the thing. And categories was the, I mean, I consider a number of different words because I didn't want to come off in a way that it felt like I was saying people were commodities, so
Right.
that you put them on the shelf the same way you would organize your pantry.
Right.
You
You did a
know,
great job of navigating that. You did an
yeah,
exceptional job of navigating
yeah. So we didn't want it to come off that way, but this is what uh, I discovered: exploring the life of the most relationally intelligent person that ever lived, which is Jesus, right?
that.
So
Amen.
whether a person looks at him or receives him in a religious way, like I do, what is not, what is indisputable, I think, is he is, whether you believe in him religiously or not, the most influential person in human history.
Amen.
So, right,
Yep.
and so he, and as a part of that is because he's the most relationally intelligent person. And so when I looked at the way he managed relationships, this is what I saw. He loved everyone biblically. That means he loved without conditions.
Right.
So you didn't have to earn love.
Yes.
He valued everyone equally.
Yes.
Janitor, CEO, all equally valued in the eyes of God.
Amen.
But he treated people differently.
Yeah.
Because although everybody is equally valuable, everyone doesn't add equal value to you.
Yeah. Will you say that again? Because I that's a line for your book and I underlined it.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone is equally valuable, but
Right.
everyone doesn't add equal value to you. And if a
Right.
person doesn't understand that, they will live their life, one, not making what I call strategic investments,
Hmm.
meaning you've got limited time, limited energy,
Yes.
limited resources. We
Yes.
are expected to steward that well. And if
Hmm.
we don't steward that well, we're going to get to a point in life Where one, if you're building a company, you're going to look and you're going to realize, okay, I put the right thing in the wrong person.
Yeah.
And two, in addition to that, I will, on a personal level, end up at a place in space where I see, well, I get to a point in my life where I recognize that the people who mean the most to me got the least from me.
Yes.
So treating everybody right doesn't mean treating everyone the same. And Jesus had what historians call an inner circle, Peter, James, and John.
Mm-hmm.
And the way he managed those relationships was unapologetically different than the way he managed relationships with others. And so that was kind of the inspiration for it. And we came up with these categories to describe the spaces people should kind of occupy in relationships. People are friends, associates, assignments, or advisors. So those are kind of the categories we wanted to wrap our head around with this.
Yes. And I loved every single one of these. I'm going to talk about each one of those in just a second. But I love that in your book you said that our purpose requires people. And you need the right people on the bus and in the right seats, because everyone in our life has a place and we must put them there. So, and then you also said when people are misplaced, and I love this, I'm just quoting your book, like I'm just going to read the book here on the podcast and we'll call it done. If you put people in the wrong categories of our lives, it's not just detrimental for me, but it's detrimental for them also. When misplacement happens, some relationships are destroyed that were salvageable. And that's so good. So, okay. So in chapter 5, you talk about reflecting, you talk about some of the myths in Christian relationships. Kind of, I think this really spoke to me as a people pleaser and feeling like as a good Christian girl, you know, and I'm using that in air quotes, that I needed to kind of treat everybody, you know, in the same way and let people have the same access to me. You know what I'm saying? And that's, I think it's really confusing. But you wrote that we assume that if both parties love Jesus and love each other, then our relationships will be fruitful. And I think that part really spoke to me because in my book, Fear is Not the Boss of You, I wrote about having a friendship that was so near and dear to me about a decade ago that I lost. And it was so heartbreaking. And we both were women that loved Jesus. And I'm really shocked, by the way, at how many women who also love Jesus have reached out to me based on that chapter and said the same thing has happened to them. And I just, in my mind, Dharius, I kept thinking, I just called you by your first name and I meant to say Pastor Dharius, and I'm so sorry.
Dharius is fine. I told you that at the beginning.
But in my mind, I kept thinking like 2 Christian women should be able to do this better. And so in your experience, because friendships is the first part of the book that you talk about, are friendships seasonal sometimes?
Yes, 100%. Some of them are seasonal. And I think that's really a tough reality for, I think whether a person is a believer or not, that's a tough reality for people to accept. And here's one of the reasons they can be seasonal. Not all of them are, but some of them are. And here's one of the reasons. Life changes you in ways that you can't predict.
Amen to that. Yeah.
It does. It changes you in ways that you can't predict. And sometimes it changes you in ways where the chemistry is disrupted. Sometimes it changes you in ways where the value systems no longer align.
Amen.
Like, so specifically for Christians, you can share the same faith with someone. That does not mean you share the same values. And sometimes that value misalignment just causes the relationship to organically grow apart. Then sometimes we assume that people always evolve into a better version of themselves. That's ideal. That's what we like to see.
Right.
But I think if we all would just like honestly assess our lives and our experiences with people, we do know that there are times, unfortunately, that people experience things in life and they don't evolve into the best version of themselves. They regress.
Yes.
And there are times when that behavior and that mindset and their value system now threatens your ability to faithfully steward the life you're supposed to live and be responsible for those that you're responsible for. And you got to set a boundary there. And sometimes the relationships are seasonal for that reason also.
Yeah. Boundaries. That's such boundary. There's so much love sometimes is setting boundaries.
It is. Yes.
And I've learned that in parenting as well as in relationships. The second whole section that you talked about was assignments, and I might be doing these out of order. But the assignments part was really kind of on my mind simply because I didn't know that how to phrase that. Like there's certain times, Pastor Dharius, when the Lord will just kind of like tap me. And sometimes it's complete, people that maybe I don't know very well that show up in my DMs. And
Hmm.
you have a large social media following, as I do. And every once in a while, God will tell me, like, invest some time.
Yeah.
And sometimes he'll tell me to invest some time even further by like really doing some coaching and really like, delving into some deeper conversations with people that I don't know very well. And then there's a couple relationships in real life that God's like, I want you to love on this person. And I love how you explained assignments in your book, because you talked about how it's kind of sometimes a lopsided
It is.
relationship. One person's
Yes.
really giving and the other person is really receiving. And sometimes because I'm busy, I mean, I'm just going to be completely transparent and honest.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get busy and I'm like, I don't have time,
Yeah.
to
Exactly.
try to be mentoring and just loving on someone right now. So talk to me
Yeah.
about the assignments piece, because that was a really good section for me.
Yeah. So this is the assignments piece is based on, so it would be, so one, for people that aren't clear, it would be what you would call in some way a mentoring relationship.
Mhm.
So
Where you are the mentor, you're
where you
mentoring
are the
someone.
mentor, right? So it's formal or informal. It doesn't have to be
Yeah.
formal
Yeah.
where a person identifies like, hey, you're my mentor. Sometimes there's a peer mentoring relationship.
Yeah.
The point is it's a non-reciprocal relationship for the most part. And that's what aligning is all about. So when we say defining and aligning your relationships, alignment is all about aligning your investments and your expectations. So a lot of relationship frustration comes when you're expecting something that you aren't going to get from
You're
that person.
never going to get.
Yep.
Yes.
So it's like it's a person that you're calling a friend that's really an associate, and you're frustrated because you're expecting this person to behave like a friend. But just
Right.
because you call them that, it doesn't make them that.
Yeah.
Right. So calling them that doesn't
Hmm.
make them that. My
Yes.
dog, I don't know if you saw it. I got this little Maltipoo Shih Tzu Bison mix. And so he just came in here just a second ago, and I call him all of these names like he's a big dog. Come here, killer, or whatever.
Yeah.
He's not that though. It's just because I
Right.
call him.
Right. Yeah. I
So the
actually
point,
saw your door open behind you and I didn't see the dog come in. If people are watching
yeah.
on YouTube, they can see this. And I was thinking, Pastor Darius, that door's moving. But then I saw the dog in a second.
Yeah.
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 But I
So
get your
he's
point.
figured
You
out a
call
way to
him
get,
something he is not. Yes.
yeah. And so when it comes to assignments, uh, we created this category because I found particularly people who like to serve people or people who can be people pleasers can assume that every need is your responsibility.
Hmm.
And it is not.
Right.
And so a person has to, I think, especially the busier you get, the clearer God has to be on
Hmm.
where you need to make investments.
Amen.
And then that way, the investment you're making in that person is a result of your obedience to God, not necessarily your fondness of or your expectation of this person. That means you don't feel slighted
Hmm.
when they move on,
Yes.
or they don't reciprocate in a way that you'd like to see them reciprocate. And I think that's really, really important. Like everyone that you can help, you're not supposed to.
Mm.
And it is God's
That is
responsibility.
game changing theology.
Yeah, it's God's responsibility. I think we step into unintentional God complex when we try to meet every need. It's
Mm.
like it's important to trust God with another person's well-being. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And that's important not only like in just personal relationships, but it's going to happen with business relationships, and if you're in a religious space with church relationships and opportunities and things of that particular nature, you're going to have to say some no's, set some boundaries,
Hmm.
and trust that God's going to meet their needs another way, because
Yeah.
you aren't the only way He can meet their needs.
Yeah. I'd like to just mention, because I'm sitting here thinking of a listener at home who's going, well, perhaps you're called, to mentor people or their assignments because of your position, or me because of the fact that I coach a lot of people. But I think God calls everybody, regardless of where you're at in life, to be mentoring or loving on others. It's a Titus 2 principle. And
Yeah.
but how do you know? Because I know they're gonna send me a DM and they're gonna say, so how do you know if God's calling you, to be in an assignment category with somebody? Like, does God,
Yeah.
how does that, like, um, part of like what I feel like I'm good at, Pastor Darius, is like not talking Christianese to people. So for me,
Hmm.
sometimes it's just a hunch. It's like
Yeah.
somebody will say something to me, and I literally will just have this gut feeling. I think I'm supposed to like actually spend some time. I don't know if I'm right or I'm wrong.
Yeah,
I'm willing
sure.
I would rather go ahead with my hunch and God end up being like, no, girl, that was lame of you. That is not what I said at all.
Yeah.
Then not kind of walk in that direction. But what does that look like for you? Like, how do you know when you're supposed to invest in someone else?
Great question. So for me personally, there are a few filters I kind of put this through.
Yes.
So
I'm going to
uh,
write this down. You go for it.
yeah. So the first one is obviously intuition. And
Yeah.
that is one of the ways I feel like God speaks to me. Now, every time I have an intuition doesn't mean it's God, right? And every time that it is God doesn't always mean it turns out favorably or the way that I anticipate it would.
Yes.
But that's a huge part of it. Like, do I have a hunch
Yeah.
that I am in some way supposed to throw a part of my life into this person?
Mm-hmm.
That's important, right? The second thing, this may be more customized to me because it speaks to the nature of my calling and where is the highest and best use of me, and that is appetite. Intuition, do they have an appetite?
Oh, do they
do
have
I sense that they have a hunger for, a passion for, a commitment to improvement, right? Do you want my attention or do you want my assistance? That's really,
so good.
really, really important, right? Do you want to, are you, and there's nothing wrong with this, but are you seeking a mentor in a relationship because you admire me in some way and it's going to help you feel better about you just by being in a mentoring relationship with me? Or are you really going to steward this well? Do you genuinely have an appetite for what I'm serving? Because everyone doesn't serve the same thing. I think you just mentioned how clear you were on, hey, I think I kind of do good by not speaking Christianese and et cetera. So if a person kind of has an appetite for that jargon or something that is just really kind of mired and covered in like religious rhetoric and tradition, then they're hungry for something that your restaurant's not serving, you know?
Right, I can't give them, yeah.
That's two. And then the third one and the last one for me is, and it doesn't mean that I always have all three of these, but this is a filter that I put things through because I was mentoring a group of about 31 pastors, and I'm in a season in my life now where I'm going deeper and not wider. So I made a decision to kind of shut that down and shrink it drastically from like 31 down to the single digits. And so when it came to making a decision to go deeper and not wider and to kind of shrink this down, this last one was really important to me. So it was really just affection, you know, and it's a little easier when I know the person, but sometimes just initially. So there are people that I have been mentoring longer that I couldn't continue to mentor. And there are people that I met recently that I'm continuing to mentor because I just have affection for them. There is a chemistry, there's a connection there. And it is not, so there's a scripture in Hebrews that talks about the importance of managing leadership relationships well, so that the people that lead you can do it with joy and not with grief, because that's not profitable for you.
Yes.
So for me, who do I have affection for? Do I genuinely enjoy being with this person and investing in them? And for me, that's the filter that I'm taking things through in this season.
I love that so much. I literally wrote down all those filters. So
yeah,
let's talk about associates real quick. So when you talk about associates, is it talking about work or not necessarily?
Yeah, it can be.
Okay.
It can be. I think I really leaned in on the work side in the
You did, which I appreciated as a business person. I love.
Yeah.
I know you call it like a tweener relationship.
It is. It is because for most adults, that's where we're going to spend the most of our time, honestly. We're going to spend it at work.
Yeah.
And quantitatively, we're going to be spending more time with people that we work with, sometimes in our own family.
Yeah.
It's just, if you're doing it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, there it is.
Yes.
The point that I'm making is, though, to me, that's the most complicated category. And it's because that relationship is a relationship that is built on common interests or intersecting schedule. Mm-hmm. So we kind of like the same thing. And so that put us in the same place, or we got intersecting schedules. We work together, our kids play AAU together, something along those lines. And there is a friendly nature to the relationship. Yet at the same time, the chemistry is not there in terms of your desire to go deeper with this person, mm-hmm. or you are unsure about the character of the person. So you don't feel safe enough at this point to go deeper with that person. And what's weird about this relationship is it can be complicated because the person can see you in a way that you don't see them. So
Okay.
they can see you as a friend.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they were like, you know what? I trust you, and they
Yeah.
can vent to you, and they can be very transparent with you. And then sometimes they could expect you to reciprocate, and you're like,
Guarded.
you feel safe talking to me, but I don't feel safe
Right.
talking to you that way.
Right.
And yeah, I say, it's important. It's one thing to do things in life with somebody. That's an associate. But when you're doing life with somebody, that's a friend.
Oh, that's such a good distinction. This is why the book is just gold. Okay. Last one that you talked about. And then there's much more to the book other than just these four things, but I just wanted to start here. So you talked about advisors
Yes,
and people who are mentoring you, essentially, correct?
yes, yes, exactly.
Here's my question for you. Okay, so I have a business coach. I have a woman that I call my spiritual mother, even though she's not old enough to be my mother. She's, only
Hmm.
10, 12 years older than I am. But I call her when I need spiritual advice. I call her when Jill, will you help me pray through this? I love her. She's a woman of God. But how does one find an advisor? And how do you find an advisor when you're really wanting that? Does that make sense?
Yes, it
Because it's not
makes
like you can
sense.
be like, you can't put up a Facebook post. I cannot put this on Facebook Marketplace, in search
Yes,
of an
yes,
advisor. So tell us how, because I think there's a
yeah.
lot of people that are longing for that, honestly.
Hmm.
And there because and I know this, Pastor Darius, because people ask me all the time to do like one-on-one coaching with them and mentoring with them, and I see the real need for it, and I also have the need for it. So how does one find advisor?
Very good question. I get that a lot. I get that a lot. So I'm going to be very John Maxwell-ish on this
Okay.
on this first point here, and that is, it, you know, if you don't share my faith, this is where I wish you shared my faith. And that's because the first thing I'm going to say is pray.
Okay. Amen.
And I think that's really important. And I'm going to tell you why. I don't think a person's greatness doesn't determine if they're your mentor. Your goals do.
Okay.
So they can be incredibly great, but they may not be rich where you're poor. That's a mentor. They're rich
Mm.
where you're poor. And so there are people who mentor me. So my executive coach, no one would know his name. Um, he's not a famous coach.
Yeah.
Um, he coaches a handful of people. So I may have greater influence. I may have a greater reach, but he's very rich where I'm poor.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And so I do think there is at least from my perspective, there's a God factor of kind of bringing someone before you, whether it's a podcast, a YouTube video, or an event, or however you come across that person that is full where you're empty. And then the second thing, which I found, this is at least in my experience, directly and indirectly, 9 times out of 10, it is pursuit.
Okay.
My mentoring relationships, for the most part, are relationships I've had to initiate.
Okay.
And I think my advice to people in this area is this: you got to understand that most of the time, anybody that's great in some area is probably busy,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep, that's true.
Great in any area, they're probably busy. And unless there is like divine intervention, the likelihood it can happen, but without divine intervention, it's unlikely that they're all of a sudden are just going to decide, let me add something or someone to my plate, without God kind of prompting and leading them to do that. So I feel like pursuit is really important because that's a relationship that you have to initiate.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I found. I have found that a lot of people don't have mentors because they answer the mentor's question before they ask it. They assume that the answer is going to be no, so they don't make the ask.
Oh, that's good. You want to know why that's good? Because I literally on my Instagram this morning told people um, how I literally just all of a sudden was like, you know what? I'm just going to ask and see if I can get Pastor Darius on the
Yes.
podcast. And we miss
Yeah.
out on so much richness for exactly that reason. It's the fear of, it always goes back to that fear of rejection, of the no, and
Yeah.
therefore we don't even ask the questions. So
Yep.
do
So
you
those are
feel
the two
like,
things that I would say.
okay, do you feel like advisor relationships, should there be an exchange of money for that, or never, never, never?
So I think it depends.
Okay.
So for me, let's just say in my line of work, so pastorally, when I'm discipling or mentoring someone in the context of my local church, then there still is, if I'm going kind of outside of what I feel like is expected of me from God in terms of my role, and just realistically with the responsibility I'm trying to manage, then there is some reciprocation that I expect in terms of the filter that I kind of put you through. Yes. Are you hungry? Are you committed? Are you honoring my time? Are you following my advice, etc.? But then in spaces outside of that, I feel like a person has a right to define what that needs to look like. But for me, I feel like training a person to invest in their own development, in their own growth, and to honor a person's time in some way is something that benefits them beyond your mentoring relationship. And so this is why I don't have issue with saying, hey, it's okay to require or to expect some kind of investment outside of that. Mm-hmm. I just really think it depends on the nature of the person, the nature of the mentoring, and things of that nature. Because someone may say, oh, you only give me an hour of your time. And it's like, no, I gave you in an hour what it took me 15 years to get.
Amen.
And schooling and mistakes and books and investment that I made. Yeah. So people say that about sermons. Like, how long did it take you to put that sermon together? 20 years.
That is a great answer, because the truth is I've always wondered that. I'm like, how long do they prepare, I wonder?
Yeah.
All right, I've got one more hard question, then we'll do a couple fun ones. But I was talking to somebody on my team this week, and we were talking just about kind of the state of the world right now, and how things kind of started with social distancing back in March. And I told my team, and I'm going to do a quick podcast on this. I think for some people, social distancing has also become emotional distancing in the last few months. And I'm curious how you think that we're coping emotionally right now as a country. Are lonely people lonelier? Is there anger brewing just right below the surface? Are people, because they're physically separated, like, are they just on the struggle bus emotionally?
Yeah. When COVID happened, that people's emotional well-being, at least in our church, was my initial primary concern. Yeah. I knew, one, I didn't expect it to be this long, obviously, but I knew we were going to be able to pivot and deliver spiritual ministry to them digitally. We could do groups digitally. We could do Bible studies digitally. We could do worship digitally. Yeah. My initial concern was, how is this going to impact people emotionally? And I wasn't just talking about I'm not just talking about extroverts.
No, yeah.
Right? I'm talking about introverts. I'm talking about being made and wired to be relational, needing community, communication that takes place in each other's presence without words, the ability to show up for someone physically when they're experiencing grief, disappointment, heartache, like just something as simple as to be there and to come sit with someone who's grieving and going through a breakup or something along those lines. So I really feel like, one, I've been amazed and inspired by the resilience of our people. Yet at the same time, I would say that I am a little concerned about the adverse effects that this is having upon some people long term. And what I mean by that is, you either live in constant frustration during COVID, or you adapt in some way to this new normal.
Right.
And that adaptation, adjusting, or whatever word a person wants to use, for some people is much more difficult than others. And so there are people that I listen to or hear from that are grieving the fact that they have to adapt.
Yeah.
And it's creating some cynicism and some frustration and things of that particular nature. And there are others who are, I think, potentially adopting personality traits and tendencies that are not consistent with who they are. But COVID has just kind of made them be less relational, less dependent, less open to support from other people because they're having to do it on their own. So I'm interested to see, is this thing dissipates. And I know people feel like it won't, but one day it will.
Yes, amen.
um, how people
Are you prophetic? Are you?
kind
Yes,
of relate.
you're speaking that prophetically. Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I've found uh, my husband's an extrovert and I'm an introvert, and we both struggled in our own way. You know, he wants to be around groups of
mhm.
people, and I just want to be alone. And he can't
Yeah.
be around groups of people, and I can't get everybody out of my house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's presented some really interesting dynamics. And I've also found that the lack of me feeling like I don't have a lot of control over anything right now. I didn't have control. You know,
Mhm.
my whole book tour, 12 cities, got canceled. My conference in
Wow.
April, canceled. My son's graduation, canceled. Like, and just feeling that lack of control. I feel like I'm having confession right now. By the way, I grew up
Mhm.
Catholic, but it's actually like brought up in me some some anger and some like a little bit of rebellion at times. I feel like rebellious. I feel angry when I have to put on the mask,
Yeah.
and so I'm trying to like work through all those emotions. And I know, like, you know, we've got 4 little kids here, and there's 6 of us in our house, and we're all dealing with it in different ways. But
Mhm.
I just was curious of how you thought we were doing, because yeah, I hope there's going to be an end in sight to, you know,
Yeah.
current craziness.
Yeah.
But all right,
Yeah.
let's do a hard pivot. Can I just ask you some rapid fire questions that I ask all my
Sure.
guests? Funny, crazy stuff. Okay, so
Yeah.
other than your own book and other than the Bible, what's your favorite book?
Boundaries, Henry Cloud.
Ah, I've got it upstairs. Excellent. How about the favorite room in your house?
The room I'm in right now,
Your office?
my
Your
office. Yeah.
excellent. Favorite place to vacation when we used to vacation?
I prefer I've got two. There isn't one. All right.
Okay.
So one's Miami. I prefer that in the States.
Mhm.
And then my second is Jamaica outside of the States. Montego Bay is permanent. And obviously the beaches and things of that nature, but the energy, the festive
Yeah.
atmosphere. Yeah, I love that about Jamaica. So
Excellent.
that's my 1A and 1B.
Excellent. All right. Last question. How do you define freedom in your life? I like to ask all of my guests that. Like, what does freedom look like to you?
It is the ability to live out of purpose and not out of need.
Oh, that's good. That's really
And
good. It's
so,
almost like you
yep.
rehearsed that. You didn't even know I was going to ask you that. That's a great answer.
Well, well, that's actually what 5 years ago when I started working for my coach, as we kind of
Mhm.
went through, working with my coach. I'm sorry, we went through this kind of activate plan, and it just kind of clarifying
Yes.
what I feel like I want in life, and
Yeah.
that was it. And so everything that we did in terms of the soul work that I did with a counselor to deal with emotional issues,
Yep.
so that I can make decisions out of purpose and not out of the need to please or the need to serve, right? Because that's bondage.
Yeah.
It is.
It
It
is.
imprisons you,
Mhm.
and or setting financial goals, so that when it came to making decisions and choices, that I didn't have to compromise or to allow money to drive whether or not I felt like I could say yes to God.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, yep, that's it.
I love
If you
it.
can live out of purpose and not out of need, you're
Oh,
free.
that's so good. Okay, so podcast listeners, you can see why I love Pastor Darius and his ministry and his book and his podcast. And so, where would you most like people to connect with you at? Where can they buy the book? Where would you prefer they go? Straight to Amazon, or do you have on your website? You prefer them go there?
Yep. So right now, Amazon is,
Okay.
Amazon, Barnes and Nobles,
Hmm.
iBooks,
Yes.
wherever books are sold, they can get that. And in terms of if they want to explore the concept further, they can go to DariusDanielsRQ.com,
Okay.
and we created a relational intelligence assessment.
I
It's
did
a
not
free
even.
assessment.
I went straight
Yeah,
to the book. Okay. RQ.com.
yeah,
Darius Daniels
yeah.
RQ. Okay.
RQ.com. So there's a free assessment that we put together, and we work with the person that's done a lot of assessments for the Gary Chapman and things of that particular
Yep.
nature. So this is the person that we work with, and we came up with this assessment just to kind of help people see where they are. So I would really encourage more people to kind of take advantage of that. And as always, Instagram and Facebook are places for people to connect with me. We try to use those platforms as three things. One is a pulpit. We want to get a message across.
Yes.
Two is a bulletin board, because we want to let you know the things that we got coming up that are available to serve you. And then three is a window. We want people to be able to look into my life and our world, our family to a degree, and just kind of see who we are and what's going on. So we do those three things primarily on Instagram and on Facebook.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know you're busy. Thank you for taking the time to do this. Please send Shamika my love. I just adore her. And just blessings to you guys and just more impact, more of all the things that God has for you. I'm so glad to have you here today.
Well, listen, thank you for allowing me to be a part. My wife is leading a book club. Well, not right at this moment. She's leading a book club right now called Fear is Not the Boss
I
of You.
about died. Do you know that? I literally, I'm like, I have somebody messaged me that they said, did you know that Pastor Darius's wife is doing a book study with Fear's Not the Boss of You? And I messaged him back. I'm like, I feel like I'm standing on the internet naked. Like, I'm like, that is so vulnerable. And then literally, I don't know. And I went back and told your wife this. That week, we went back to #1 on Amazon in the area of Christian leadership.
Wow.
We stayed there for a month. We fell off for 2 months. We went back that week and I told her, if it's because of you doing the Bible study with my book, like I'm so honored. So thank you guys for that. I honestly mean it.
Absolutely.
I told you in the beginning here, I kind of straddle a funny place. You know, I'm not really in the Bible world enough to be like I obviously don't do
Yeah.
what you do, but I've got so much Bible in me for the business world. It's kind of
Yeah.
it's an interesting lane that I love to run in. And
Yeah.
so I so appreciate you guys' support. So thank you. Bless you guys.
Absolutely. Take care.